remove my sport coat.
Yes, sir.
Yes, please.
I'll need to get a shirt on.
Andrew says, why don't we take Bermudas just in case we can do that? Well, thank you. Let me give just a little bit of background, and then I'm going to ask Andrew to take the lead on the financial matrix. But let me just give a little bit of background to set this up.
Mr. Carter, could you move up a little bit, please?
Dick, it's very hard of hearing.
I can.
Okay.
You laid this so I would block it. No, you want to go to here, so you're quiet.
I can do this. That's good. And then Andrew, you can move up later too.
And I talk loud.
Thank you, sir.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Deb, is he okay on the camera? Deb, is he okay on the camera?
He will be.
Okay.
Now he is.
My good angle. We've talked to you a couple of times related to a number of things, but primarily related to the core project. And in our last meeting, we laid out a number of items related to the project, how it interfaced with your current USDA renourishment project that we all know began back in 2013-14. We talked about the economics of those payments, how they had been structured, the fact that when those payments began, they began, excuse me, on a 30-year level principal and interest basis with the USDA. And because the local government commission had to approve a draw note for us to pay construction, because the USDA would only pay when construction was finished, because we had to take a bank note to do the construction awaiting the reimbursement of the USDA money, that essentially that had to be approved by the local government commission. And they basically said, okay, we hear you have the USDA loan, but we have a policy problem with 30-year financings in general, unless it is a water and sewer or airport enterprise. And we have a concern that long-term payments for sand that will wash out into the ocean probably isn't good business. So we hear you have the program, but before we will approve the draw note so you can get the money to actually build it, we want you to sign a prepayment agreement with us. That was done, approved by City Council, signed. I think all of you have a copy of that now. That was brought up in the last meeting. Hopefully you do. We had it in our file, and I think provided it over. I'm sure that Brian had it in his file. So as a result of that, to the extent that the town moves forward on the new project, the Corps of Engineers project, we will have what we defined in that last presentation to you. We will have an overlap period. And that is based upon our current, and although we have had really, really good work from Caitlin, from Lauren, from David, we're still finally refining, we're virtually there, but based upon the numbers, it appears that it probably will not be until 2026 until there's sufficient collections inside the current beach operations to have paid off the USDA loan. And so as we said the last time, and I'm not trying to be repetitive, I just want to sort of set the discourse for talking next. Based upon what the Corps has indicated to us, they believe the core project would start in 22. So we basically got 4 or so years of overlap where you would have payments for both that have to be accounted for. We also told you in that meeting, because we believe, looking at your financial circumstances, that you will need to not only borrow for the initial 16.5 million, that also you would have to borrow for the renourishments that would follow, because they are in the 11, 12, $13 million range as best they can be estimated now. Now, I know we all know that all of these numbers are estimates, and until bids are taken, they're the best effort. I'm a believer that they've estimated high, that's my hope, but we really do not know that until times come. So in a theory that says every 5 to 7 years, you're going to have to do a renourish. And to take words out of it, I'm going to refer to the initial project as nourish and the maintenance projects as renourish. Because that's a 5 to 7 year, the Corps believes it's 5 and have done that in their 50-year life cycle cost analysis every 5th year. Now, the good news is we, as you know, do many beach towns and advise them on nourishment and other projects. And one of the first renourishments we've seen of late came in Nags Head. And their renourishment was almost 8 years, was it not, Andrew? 7 years. And the initial, now it's a FEMA engineered beach and not a Corps of Engineer designed and nourished beach. But the 5 became 7, thankfully. So what we did to be hopeful is we estimated your repayment of $16.5 million, your portion, over 7 years, in hopes that we could make it 7 before the renourishment. And you know, out of that, the debt service is approximately $3 million annually. Now, thankfully, your current beach fund produces in the range of $3 million annually. And so if we only had one project, we wouldn't have what we termed for you the overlap period. Now, one of the things we have not estimated is we know there's a growing project out there. We know there's the potential for other zones or phases to have potential costs. So we had to look at for you, how do you raise the money to get the additional $3 million a year? And at the end of the last meeting, you asked us to come back to you with how we could split that out. What about parking? What about additional occupancy tax? What about property taxes, both at the District 5, the MSD 5, and then shared townwide? Okay. So we have done that. Now, also at discussion with the mayor and the manager and others, we prepared a actions list for you that we think is important to think about. And if times permits, we're certainly willing to go into that as well. I believe y'all have seen a copy of it. So with that having been said, unless y'all have general questions, I'm going to ask Andrew to take you through how much new net parking revenues we think we can get. What does 1% generate if you got a new occupancy tax? How does that lower the need from property owners? And what would it cost to get that money with multiple scenarios, either from property owners only in the MSD 5 or with a sharing of the MSD 5 plus 50% from the town? Now, I just want to say up front, so you will all know, we are not recommending a split of 50-50. We simply presented it for purposes of how you're to look at something. And Andrew has his computer and the matrix is fully integrated. And so if we say, do it in this percent, it will spit out the new numbers, okay? Unfortunately, we don't have a big screen that it's on, but he can tell us stuff.
I just have one statement before we move on to Andrew, which is, in listening to what you're saying, I believe it falls in line with what the board's goals and desire are to be able to plan for all of the additional projects in the future. So once this overlap of the USDA loan and the new phase 5 spending is complete, we basically would have $3 million left that would be available to go towards other beach projects annually. Is that a fair statement?
Mayor, it is. And here again, not so much as a recommendation, but a thought to think through, because you're not finishing the entire beach.
Right.
At one point, you could say if this was an overlap and it was doing everything, after the overlap was over, the 3
Right.
million would be fine. Unfortunately, it probably isn't.
Right.
So yes, that would free up the extra 3 million.
Debt
You
service.
would do your own study on how much it would take of that 3 million to do it over what time periods. We would work with you to look at the amortizations, how quick you could do it, blah, blah.
Because the one thing I just want everybody to understand is, well, the immediate push is for a response on this federal project for phase 5. We as a board have the goal and desire to be able to plan for once the COBRA designation is removed. How do we do 2, 3, and 4? How do we
Exactly.
help 1? So in my opinion, or what I see happening here is this model that we're creating will be able to migrate up to the different phases
Exactly.
of the beach. So I just want to give the board an opportunity to speak on that first.
Exactly. And can I say one other thing to that? I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
Mr. Let me say one other thing. What we have learned in looking at the respective beach towns we work for, which are dozens, to accumulate and have fund balance in the bank so that you're not always starting at zero, gives you great capacities to do joint funding. Some pay go out of your fund balance, less to be borrowed. When we did the Nags Head project, they had retained their tax levies. The note was paid off in 5 years. They didn't have to do it for 7. So they had accumulated 2 years of fund balances and were able to finance the next project at a less amount than they would have been otherwise. So it just, if you can get the money, keep it in the fund, use it efficiently in the future, it can help really make the projects bigger.
And then just, if I can, Joanne,
Yes, sir.
just a couple of things to clarify. First off, there's been a lot of social media stuff, but looking at the financials and looking at the revenues of this town, if you can balance your checkbook, we have to raise money if we want to do this. I mean, it's not possible given the fiscal realities of this town. So putting that aside.
Yeah, Mr. Grant, can you speak up?
Oh, sure. All right. And
Talk
so-
as loud as I do.
All right. So anyway, my point though is when you were talking about the amortization periods, that seems to be, we've gotten feedback from people about, well, why isn't it 30 years? And I think what you're saying, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, is you can't keep overlapping things going forward. That if you say, for example, the way you structured it, if we can get 7 years before the renourishment, our commitment under the renourishment could be greater than the initial commitment under the 16, especially the way that the inflation numbers in this project have grown, all right? So what you're saying is, look, you may have some dollars after you pay off the USDA loan, but the two things that you're gonna have to plan for is, and I think to the mayor's point is, we don't wanna be one and done with this project. We don't wanna tie up all the financial resources of the town, okay, and not be able to do anything in the future. And I think what you're saying is the model that you're trying to build for us is something that will be sustainable as we go, to Mayor's point, to different areas of the beach.
Yes.
But the longer you try to do that period, it's going to be more difficult to get financing because now you're going to have financial commitments on top of financial commitments on top of financial commitments. And so the model, I think, to Joanne's point is we want something that is sustainable for other projects and not have this be a one and done project.
I would say to you, as a financial planner from cities from Charlotte down, because we're their financial advisor, all the way to beach towns, a financial plan that's constructed to match the financing to the life of the asset financed is the most appropriate method to pay for something. Otherwise, you're asking for your citizens to pay for something whose life is past and gone and is no longer usable. In this case, sand has washed out into the ocean and has to be replenished again. So really sound financial planning says you match your amortization to the life of your asset. That means you've paid that off, and then when you renourish, you have the capacity. Now, another approach could be, I'm going to do 30-year debt for the initial project, and then every 5th or 6th year, when it comes time for the renourishment, we'll pay that in cash.
Mhm.
Well, how do you think you get that cash? You have to raise taxes to put the cash in the bank. So there's no free ride here. Cash is cash is cash. We simply put forward a method to you that has a lower interest cost. If you borrow for 30 years, it's higher interest. So it's lower interest cost. It has you amortizing so that when the next nourishment occurs, you're ready to move into another low interest borrowing because it's a short period to get ready for the next renourishment. I think that's a fabulous point.
Right, and I think that the other point that you're making, and I've heard comments about, well, how is Surf City able to do KO? And the answer is Surf City doesn't have $15 million in debt tied up in the same area.
This is their first beach
Yeah,
project.
they haven't done a beach
They haven't
project,
done a
and
beach
we've done
project.
2 in the last 10 years.
Right, and so when I hear that, and look, I've owned property here for 20 years, but I've also, we've relocated here a couple of years ago. What people don't realize is the same beach area that we're talking about, this project is the same one that's carrying $15 million in debt.
Right.
Which is almost primarily all of the debt of town.
Exactly.
Is tied up in exactly the same thing.
Exactly.
So to take another short-term view of this thing makes no sense unless we, as a board, which I would never go along with, or I think the other members of the board, is if we tie up all of our financial capabilities and say, we're not going to raise taxes, we're not going to do any of this kind of stuff, and we'll just take this one at a time, what you're telling us is that's poor fiscal planning.
It is, I don't love the word poor since I'm your advisor. I think it's not the highest level of financial planning.
And the other thing I'm doing as we go through this is keeping track of some of the items that have come up in our conference calls with the Corps as it relates to the PPA or the agreement that we need to sign. And just to keep the board up to speed too, one of the things that they've said is when the 5 to 7 years nourishment comes up to be done, if there's a party that's not financially able to move forward with it at that time, whether it's a non-federal sponsor or a federal sponsor, you don't have to do it. Now, my only issue with that is we have not been able to get that reduced to writing. So it's nice that we've been told that. And Brian, I'm kind of keeping a list because these are the things I want to make sure we follow up on. And I don't know if it just goes into an appendix on the PPA since they really don't want to change language for us. But it would be nice to know that there's no partner that would be financially tied to a renourishment effort if it didn't make sense to do, if it didn't make sense to do, or you financially couldn't do it. I mean, what if the federal government didn't have the money to put towards the project either? So I know we've talked about that. I know they've said it, but I haven't seen it in writing yet.
I believe, and I can't speak for the Corps, but I know in that phone conference that you're referring to, there was a notion that you terminate with no penalty other than you have to pay for the work that's been done.
Mhm.
So I suspect they may be backing into the concept that if you don't have the money, you just terminate. But we'll pursue whatever avenue we can pursue to see if they'll commit to what they told us on the phone in writing.
Yeah, because they didn't really correlate that discussion with termination. I don't know that if we couldn't afford it 1 year, it doesn't mean we want to terminate our 50-year project. It's just that one nourishment effort, maybe we just got sand because there was unfortunately a storm that came through. And I would think that Surf City would want that same type of language. Yes, Alderman Leonard.
Somewhere out there, I would have to assume that there's a scenario that we just discussed is actually happening, where somebody with an ongoing project with the Wilmington District or any of the others wasn't able to come up with the money for the periodic renourishment. And it'd be interesting from a historical perspective to see how that was addressed.
Exactly.
What did they do? Did they say, well, yeah, you're done and pay up, you're out? Or did they say, we'll catch you next time? Or was there any meeting of the minds in the middle somewhere?
Exactly.
I think there is an example or two. We'll run
Just
that
got
by.
it. I mean,
Exactly.
you look at all of the, even around the Wilmington area, the ones that Wilmington District would have been responsible for, Figure 8, Mason Borough, all of those, there's Wrightsville. There's got to be somewhere down the line, somebody missed a cycle. And what happened?
Exactly.
And what was the result?
Exactly. And can I say something to that,
Yes, sir.
Mayor? Because Y'all know that we are hired and paid by you to sit on your side of the table. And we're very vociferous on that. And so we're here to protect you. The bottom line is the same people who are there now may not be there 5 years from now. There may be a whole different administration. There may be a whole different view of how all of this happens. I'll give you one specific example. New Start programs to start mass transit systems went away 3 years ago. So there's been no New Start mass transit systems in 3 years. So I do know that changes come and changes go. So from our point of view, if the federal government doesn't get their appropriation, I can tell you your portion of renourishment, if you do it, is going to more than double. So all of a sudden, your renourishment cost, because they're not subsidizing renourishment, will be more than the 16.5 million now.
In that scenario, if any party is unable, per PPA, right? It would be the federal, if the federal government said we can't do it, we didn't get the appropriation or whatever, then the thing would just sit and ride.
Well, and
Correct?
that is what we were told, but all I'm simply saying is I'm not comfortable just being told something on a conference
There's no
call.
words
I
on
guess-
any of this.
Right.
Well, my point is in that scenario, it may not necessarily be the town of North Topsail Beach that says we can't
Certainly.
afford it right now. It could just as easily be the federal government, particularly given what's going to take place potentially on the first Tuesday of next month.
Exactly. I think their chances of not having the money because it's huge dollars, bigger than ours, is more likely than us not having the money because it's our beach. We want it to be done
I
right.
agree.
All right, going back to the phone conversations and the idea that the project was said verbally by the Army Corps that if one of the partners couldn't afford the renourishment cost, the project would terminate. But I think that's not what we're asking.
That's not what we're
here.
asking.
We're saying the project would be delayed. So that's
Exactly.
why it's important to clear this
Exactly.
Exactly.
up with the Corps,
Exactly.
because there's a big difference between terminating the project for the next 45 years
Right.
Right.
or delaying a renourishment cycle for 2 or 3 years until the partner that's lacking the funds comes up with the funds.
Yes.
Well, I was just gonna say, it wouldn't necessarily have to wait till the next cycle, I wouldn't think. I would think if something was put into place so that you had the money in, say, 2 more years, you just put it off for the 2 years, not the whole cycle.
Exactly.
And then the cycle would start over.
Yeah.
I would think that would be an option.
But let me give you the biggie out of it.
Okay.
Not mentioned anywhere, hadn't been discussed. Don't get the money at the federal level and or our level, it gets pushed. You feel the pinch to do something because things are happening. And so we say, we've been informed by the Corps, and I'm learning a lot by this because I know the Corps does a beefier, bigger, stronger project. Great. So we're 2 or 3 years in, we can't get appropriations, we see our beach going away, and we say, hey, let us do an engineered beach version of renourishment. Less cost, not as much sand. I want to know that we could say we're doing that out of our money, and then when they come in 3 more years later and say, okay, we've got the money to do it, what position does that put us in? Has our money been wasted, or will that get counted in some way? So the complications of putting off and what positions we're left in to do something is not single or duplicately function. It's triplicated and quadruplicated.
But
And
in
so
that,
all of that has to be thought about.
but in that specific scenario, if a storm has come through and we're damaged and feel the need to do something, part of the benefit of this project being a federal project is they're supposed to come in and take care of that and put our beach back the way it was without the town having to outlay that initial expenditure where FEMA would reimburse us. So yeah, we're going to be in a bit of a jam if for some reason they're not able to do that, but that is what they're committing to in the PPA, I believe. Is that fair, Brian?
if they have the appropriations.
The other thing is this,
Yes.
the
If they have
funds,
the money.
the funds came through a federal disaster aid program. It's like $750 million to the Corps. So they have already been allocated the money. It's just the Corps' decision to decide how to spend it in the Corps-wide area. In the Wilmington district, they decided they would fund our federal project.
Okay, Alderman Grant?
Just another couple of points. You know, we get this feedback from people, you know, particularly on social media, that, in my opinion, don't take the time to educate themselves and a lot of this stuff. And one of the complaints that I've heard is, well, why didn't the town plan for this? Why didn't they already know that these things were going to happen? And two things. When I wasn't part of this board, but one of the things is we actually did something out of that area. The second thing is, if people would take the time to look at some of the things on the website, they'd understand that and I'm looking at part of the thing that we posted, because I put this together, is how much the cost of this project has changed in 10 years. All right, we started out with a construction total cost of $350 million, with the initial being 123, and now we're over $900 million.
And that's the 50-year life cycle.
That's a 50-year life cycle, and that's a 10-year thing. So, you know, I don't know what the planning was at that time, all right? But if I had been on this board and somebody told me, and that was if you remember, the objection that I had to this plan from the beginning was there's no way the town can afford this project without more tax revenue.
With its current revenue
With
stream.
the current revenues coming in. And anybody that doesn't understand that just needs to go look at the website, look at the budgets, look at the numbers coming in, the lack of money that the town's got. We've got over half the money the town spends is on public safety. All right, so it's not a matter of whether somebody planned it right or didn't. Okay, and I've run a company that was a multi-billion-dollar international company, and I can tell you, looking at this, you can't plan for something that goes up 300% in 10 years. Which also tells me, to your point, we hope the bids come in lower, but making a commitment long-term, and we're looking at something that's already gone up in 10 years, 300%, and you tell me how we're going to finance something that goes up 300% in the next 10 years, and the answer is it's not going to be possible with the town revenue. And so it's fine, and look, I support the project, assuming that we can pay for it. Okay, but it's amazing to me that with all the work that's gone in from the board, and I've only been on this board for 6 months looking at this stuff and having you come on board and everything else, this lack of people understanding or taking the time to understand what's going on with this project. Because nobody, I've heard people use terms that as a lawyer I would not use because I'd be open to libel, comments. But it's just amazing to me that if they would spend the time to look at this thing and understand, the difference in what the town is trying to do now and be fiscally responsible going forward, all right, on something like this is amazing. And I'm glad that you're here, but it becomes very tiresome to me, when I'm looking at something and I see the work that's going into this stuff and the time that people are spending on it, both the staff and everything else, for people to take cheap shots when they don't understand what's going on. All right, and I think, the fact that you're in here, I've not seen anything in the books. I've looked over the budgets, I've looked over the financial stuff and everything else. There isn't anything that I've seen that, now, you can look back on it and say, maybe we should have spent less time or whatever, or less money in this project or that project. But the fact that we have to bid stuff out that has to go with low cost, Brian, is that correct? Okay, to be accusing that this council and this town of doing things inappropriately is beyond the pale, in my opinion. And, I'm tired of it, and I think that we're trying to do the right thing here.
That's why we're putting so much time into it.
And I'm just, it's just amazing to me that if people would just spend the time to look at this stuff, okay, let's become part of the solution, not part of the problem. And that's the reason that you're here, is for a way for us to do this project, but also be financially and fiscally responsible to our people.
Exactly.
So the end of my sermon.
All right,
Well,
Alderman Leonard.
I want to echo something from my sermon from my esteemed colleague to my starboard side here. I think I'm the only one at the table who was on the board when we did the Phase 5 project back in 2013-14. I don't know if Dick was on the board or not. I don't think he was. I know that for Doug, I'm probably the only guy that when we went through all that stuff with the LGC and everything, and I'll tell everyone, including those detractors on social media who seem to be so willing to spend a lot of effort to criticize, but I don't see any of them here. The fact is that project was necessary at the time. We had no idea when the federal project, if ever, was going to be approved. It had been on the books probably 15 years. At the same time, there had been no new starts in at least that long. This is the first new start of a project from the Wilmington district in well over 2 decades. That project was put in place before 3 major named storms: Matthew, Florence, and Dorian. And that storm, or that project, in saying it was put there, and it was a FEMA engineered standard beach, it had much to do with how well that area of our town came through those storms. I rode that beach the day after Florence left, along with the fire chief, on the beach side of it, and saw for myself the differences in what was left behind that dune line in the phase 5 area as opposed to immediately north of the phase 5 area, and the difference in the damage north of where the project ended was exponentially greater than it was in that area. So I was on the board. I approved that project as one of the folks that voted on it, and I stand by that decision. And if anybody doesn't like it, we got an election coming up next year. Put your hat in the ring, put your money where your mouth is.
Well,
Mr. Alderman, could I just say too, I'm sorry, Matt.
yeah, no, go ahead.
We were here, remember the meetings we had with the local government commission
Mhm.
with your engineering firm? There was in depth, and I thought very, for a financial guy, very scientific and, engineering type discussions. And it was very well laid out about the needs and what was going to happen if things hadn't been done. So I agree. I mean, that was not taken as a project just on a whim. It was lots of work.
Well, and I would say I appreciate everybody's feedback and comments, but there's nothing we can do to change anything that we did in the past. And I also don't believe it's fair, since most of us were not on the board at the time, to be criticizing the efforts of a previous board. It was obviously done for the reasons, Alderman Leonard, that you had mentioned. So I think that we need to get back on track. This is where we're at today.
Right.
So how do we afford this? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I've got another question, comment. FEMA will come in and fill in our beaches if we have a named event and
Not-
we've lost sand.
Not here, though,
No, and if we do the phase 5 project is what I'm saying.
but it wouldn't be FEMA, it would be the Corps.
It would be the Corps that came in. Okay. What about king tides and non-named storms? And it happens before the renourishment time?
Mhm.
Would we adjust it? And if so, how would we handle that financially?
I don't think I know for a fact that we haven't spoken about that. I do believe that one of our responsibilities is to make sure we're having our annual surveys done of the beach all the way up and down. So I don't think that's any different than how we would handle phase 5 today, which is a FEMA engineered beach. I mean, I think we have to stay on top of it. And if we're having an issue, we need to raise our hand and say, we're having an issue and we need some help.
Well, I just didn't know if we needed some wording in the contract that said,
Well,
if
the only thing is the Army Corps of Engineers to date, and this is not a negative comment, it's just a fact, has not been very willing or able to change their contract to meet the needs of North Topsail Beach with some of the other things that we've asked. So we can add it to the list, but I don't believe, and I think Brian, you would agree that that's a fair statement. There's
Just to be completely candid, 20 years plus dealing with the federal government on these type of projects, I can't think of a single time there's been a substantive change
right.
to one of their contracts.
Their template. It is what it is.
Now, they will sometimes do ancillary clarifications in writing that can come in handy. There's a lot of regulations governing this, and I don't see them agreeing to treat a king tide the same way they would a named storm.
right, well, as we know, we've gotten a lot of damage from those last 2 big high tides.
Right.
And I'm thinking it may well come on to us that we have to do something about that, rather than let it all the money spent go back, for nothing. We're gonna have to maybe go back in there and put more sand in before the nourishment time. That's what I'm.
So I think that the mayor's point about keeping the annual surveys current answers your question really, Alderman Meyer. Because what will happen is, we've said that the renourishment cycle is maybe 5 to 7 years. Well, it's 5 to 7 years based on those surveys. And there's going to be a certain point when that template has lost an X amount of sand that it should have from king tide, high tides, whatever, the renourishment cycle will be sooner rather than later. And that's how that question would be addressed by the Corps, I believe.
To Mr. Carter's point earlier about Nags Head, they get pummeled way worse. And the fact that they were able to stretch their nourishment cycle to 7 years is very encouraging.
Really is.
And-
I was shocked.
And one thing again, I'm not a policymaker, but just to go to some of the comments that were made, if we need sand, we need sand. If there's a way this project can go forward, you have the federal government subsidizing a significant amount of the cost of that sand.
Right, I'm not suggesting we not do it. I'm
Right.
just saying that we might need to be prepared for it earlier,
Right. I think that's.
and we're basing everything
I
on,
think that's Mr. Carter's point on creating enough money so this is sustainable now.
if, based on the
Yeah, that's it.
surveys. And if it changed, then we might have to change some of our plan or not.
If a renourishment came quicker because of these sorts of
Right.
things, then we would have another overlap period.
Okay.
Because we
That's
wouldn't
all
have,
that's
we
all I
wouldn't
wanted
have
to
fully
say.
paid off the first 7-year loan, and we might have a shorter overlap period. Hence, keeping the rest of the 3 million, accumulating some fund balances, having ways to manage.
And this is
Right.
also, but also this is a living financial plan.
Correct.
So our intent as a board is to continue to have you all on board with us as we go, so we can
Well, thank you.
monitor and
If we last
address
today's
and.
meeting.
No, we need to keep going. Well, we do need to move on though, so Andrew
That's
can
true.
get through.
I want to make one final point, and then Andrew's coming, and then I brought some points, Mayor, if we have time to go over
Yes,
them,
sir.
which addresses steps I think do have to be taken
Okay,
and risks that exist, and if they can't be changed inside the documents, you'll have to decide if you're willing to accept
So
them.
just one quick comment. The other thing too is I think that one of the misrepresentations that's been made on social media is that we basically have done nothing over the last couple of months on this, which is frankly false. There's been, I know I've spent a lot of time on it, looking at the economics, working with you, working with other people. I know the other aldermen have done the same thing. So it's like the idea that you can move this forward, and frankly, one of the things that's missed by a lot of people in this is the regulatory and legal approvals we have to do to get things done that we're going to need to go
That
forward
is
with.
sure.
That's not something like there's legislation that's going to be required, there's legal review that's going to be required, okay? And frankly, if you don't understand that, all right, then you ought to try to learn about the rules and regulations. And being a new alderman, for example, the USDA loan, we didn't know about the prepayment penalties, we didn't know about all that kind of stuff. That financially changes everything that we've got because we don't have excess funds if they have to be applied someplace else. So it's not like nothing's been happening. You guys have been working hard. I know the staff has been working really hard on this thing.
Correct.
And it's just, there's so many misrepresentations going on that I just wish people, instead of opening their mouths on social media, okay, take the time to learn, look at the website, look at the information. So again, sermons over, go ahead.
Right.
Okay, let's
I want
keep
to give you one
moving.
more example. It's not on my list, but I want to say it quick because it was raised earlier. We have a termination clause in the agreement. The termination clause is not as fleshed out as I, as a financial person, would want it to be fleshed, because it basically says you can terminate, but you owe us what you owe us, which is what we've spent. Right, Brian?
For work performed.
For work performed. In talking with the Corps, I have attempted to get breakdowns of budgets. How much is soft cost? How much is hard cost? What gets spent at what parts of the process? So I could get my arms around, if you're 3 months into planning something, how much cost is that you would have to pay? But they're not willing to share that. And I know they want to keep it private because it helps in the bidding process, but we are not armed with abilities to say, if we get 6 months into something and say we want to terminate it, what's the ballpark of what the check will be they want from us? And
Well-
I hope we can get something done on that, maybe if not as a clause, perhaps as an addenda. I don't know
So
how you do it.
here is where this really comes into play, because Mr. Carter and I were talking about this before the meeting. So Brian, you may be able to shed some light on this, but if we have until the 31st, as the Corps has asked us to get back to them with our direction as to whether we're proceeding or not proceeding in this project. Certainly, it's been, I think, very clear from a board that if we can get through what we need to do financially here, we would like to participate in this project. But we, unfortunately, Surf City didn't have this. We've still got to go through the LGC. I don't know that it's physically possible to get through this process plus the LGC by the 31st. So,
We're not gonna, there's no way we're gonna get to the LGC.
right. So my question is, if we have every intent of moving forward and we sign the PPA, but then the LGC says, we can't allow you to do this, what is that impact to North Topsail Beach? Do you see what I'm saying? We've got that extra layer of approval.
Well, I mean, you could terminate, and some of these things teeter into legal advice that I don't.
Understand. I'm just asking you to give it some thought for
Yeah,
that.
I have. Theoretically, it would be for work already performed. But I would take the position that that clock doesn't start ticking. And again, we should probably be talking about this in closed session.
That would be fine.
From the moment the PPA is executed.
But I just want people to understand that even if as a board, if we decided tomorrow that we feel very comfortable with our financial plan and the path forward for North Topsail Beach, we do have that extra layer of approval that is beyond us.
I think that the sand coming to the North Topsail portion, realistically, the earliest is going to be 2022.
Right.
And I think that's more than sufficient time to interface, and I'll defer to the Carters, interface with the LGC.
Yep.
Get their position, depending on what we do based on the financial options.
But I guess my question goes back to and this is kind of like the chicken and the egg, right? So can we, and I'll get you, I won't forget you. Can we say that we approve this and we want to move forward with it prior to talking to the LGC?
Again, that's more appropriately in closed session. The short answer to that question is yes.
Okay.
And I can explain why, but
That's fine.
I want to preserve the attorney-client.
That'd be fine. Okay, that's fine.
That's all I
Alderman.
was gonna say. I wasn't, even though I am a lawyer, I wasn't playing lawyer. You basically, you can't enter into something unless you've got the ability to enter into it. And so,
Well, if you would like, since this is a specially called meeting, you can unanimously, it has to be unanimous. Vote to suspend the rules, amend the agenda, and add a closed session. We can discuss that today if you like.
I'd suggest we do that first and then.
Okay.
at the end.
All right.
But I think, and again, I'm not playing lawyer.
I'm just trying to make sure we do things
Your point is well taken.
appropriately.
We may be able to enter into something because I think our view is, assuming the financial plan that they put in front of us will work for us, there's too many pieces of it that are out of our control, legislative. control,
process-wise. Mhm.
Process-wise, LDC, all those type of things. So
Okay. All right, well then let's move on to Andrew. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for having us here today. Doug has given me the pleasure to deliver all the numbers and the money, which is oftentimes where the rubber meets the road on some of this. So I'll try to somewhat quickly go through the sheet. Please stop me at any time for any questions or clarifications. But we'll start in this top box here. In any financial plan where we're looking at today and into the future, we have to make assumptions. And so the key assumptions that's really driving this sheet and the cost is, of course, the first one, that the town project costs approximately $16.5 million. That would translate to approximately around $3 million in annual debt service over a 7-year period. This does not necessarily take and contemplate paying for the possible next renourishment costs that they are currently estimated at $10.9 million over a 5 to 7 period after the initial nourishment. Based on some of the studies we've gotten from staff and looking, we are estimating on this sheet that parking revenue, net parking revenue that would be coming in is about $550,000 annually. And 1% on the occupancy tax, if that was acquired, would equate to approximately $350,000 a year in additional income.
Andrew, could I make one comment with respect to both of those? On the parking and talking with the manager, a good portion of your parking is on leased land.
Yes, sir.
And so we would need to look at long-term solutions because there is no assumption of any cost above what you're currently paying to lease that land, so that the net revenues would need to be given consideration as to any future costs that are not now existing to either purchase or pay higher cost for leasing land. So I just want you to know it's based on current cost. I believe the lease expires in 2024.
Not to interject that, but the mayor's already aware of that, it's already raised the issue, so she's very well.
Good. Well, she's on top of everything. The other thing is the occupancy tax is your tax in the town. You've already heard information with respect to county tax. Occupancy
The
tax.
question, Andrew, about the occupancy tax and figuring that in long term, it's my understanding that the state allowed certain cities, and one of them is North Topsail Beach, to collect an extra 1% occupancy tax, but that's a one-time, 1-year only deal. Is that not true?
We are on that list.
We are on the list, but it's for 1 year only,
I
correct?
have to go back and check if it's only 1 year.
I believe it's 1 year.
I would say to get it long-term and plan for it in a long-term plan, it would likely take legislative action.
There's no question
No doubt about it.
We have to see local legislation.
And if we do that, we should go for 3.
Well, yeah.
But
If we could do that, go for unlimited.
Well, the
Let them
county,
keep it.
the county has already responded back to our request to retain the, to have, so, I mean, we can increase that, it sounds like.
And can I just add one other thing on that? I want to thank the mayor for her letter to the county. Another thing that's been misrepresented, the whole idea of getting that in front of the county was, we assumed they were not going to give us their share of this because they refused to in the past. We now have them in writing, okay, supporting us going out and getting the additional money, which was the entire intent of the email, okay? Not to do anything else, but to get them on the record as now supporting us going out and trying to get a permanent tax. So I would congratulate the mayor on that because it was very well done. And I know that's been misrepresented as, oh, they told us to get, we knew they weren't going to give us the money, all right? So now they are on record as supporting us going after it ourselves. So thank you again, Mayor.
Oh, thank you for your input into that.
But to get that extra 3% occupancy tax would require a change in state statutes such that occupancy tax for this municipality would be 9%.
Yes, we've only used an example of an additional 1 here, but if you did more than one, absolutely. Because everybody pays the cumulative tax.
Well, let's
And the
let
real-
Andrew get through it.
Yeah,
and
we
then we
need to
can-
do this and then hold questions.
Yeah, I'm making notes too for process.
So the last of the assumptions, of course, is the valuation. We've rounded these numbers for this page. Most all the numbers are rounded to the next penny, so that it just looks nice and round. Approximately $1 billion in valuation of the town translates to a penny in tax rate. Property tax rate equates to approximately $100,000.
And that's for you guys that came from the Northeast where everything is done per 1,000.
Mhm.
North Carolina is done per 100. That's why it's known as pennies rather than dollars.
And then in phase 5, which was one of the, as where the project is being done, the valuation in that area for the project is approximately 410 million of the 1 billion. A penny in that area generates approximately $41,000. And
Andrew,
Yes,
can
sir.
you give us copies of your notes?
You have it.
You have it.
Oh, it's
Do you
on
have
this?
it?
That's it.
Sorry.
that's it. And then as Doug mentioned before, this sheet, static sheet, does a theoretical split of 50-50 as we look at different options. So all of this kind of gets to the next box called the revenue matrix, is about generating the $3 million a year that we need to pay the debt service on the $60.5 million project.
Mhm.
There we have 4 scenarios we've looked at, And then within those scenarios, what it would look like for the MSD to carry all of it and what that theoretical 50-50 split would look like as well. So in the first scenario is we're getting all the sources. We're getting parking, we're getting increased occupancy tax. And so to generate the $3 million we need, we're getting $550 from parking, $350 from the new 1% occupancy tax. If phase 5 is paying for the rest of it alone, that's $2.1 million that needs to be generated. 2.1 million divided by 41,000 is 51 cents. So the tax rate that would be increased in just MSD 5, that phase, would be 51 cents. If we did the theoretical 50-50 split that we're looking at now, where that 2.1 million would be shared between townwide and phase 5 at 50-50, then it would be 26 cents in MSD 5 and 11 cents townwide. As we move down the sheet, what happens if we lose occupancy tax? So we lose one of the sources that we were looking at in scenario 1. So in scenario 2, it's just the parking and property taxes. So if we take away that 350,000, it increased the amount needed to be generated in phase 5 and townwide to 2.45 million. That increases the number of pennies in phase 5 alone to 60 pennies. If we did a 50-50 split, it goes to 30 pennies and then 12 for townwide. The next box will take us, the very bottom box will take us to what does the tax rates look in each of those zones if we did those scenarios. So just to do the revenue. So scenario 3, we'll go quickly. We get occupancy tax but don't do parking. MSD has gone to 65 pennies. Alone, and if we split it 50-50, it's 32 pennies in MSD 5 and 13 pennies townwide. And then again, if we only have property taxes, we don't do parking, we don't get occupancy tax, then it's all on the phase 5 MSD or a 50-50 split. You'll see to raise $3 million in phase 5 alone is approximately 73 pennies. And if you did 50-50 split, it'd be 37 pennies in the MSD and 15 townwide. So as I said, the last box is how does this translate to what people might actually be paying in tax rates in the different zones, townwide and the MSD. So you'll see the current
and the county tax.
And the county tax.
This is total tax bill.
So if we look, there's a 41 cent town property tax. The county's current is 71 cents. So currently, the town members are paying $1.12 currently. Under scenario 1, you'll see it took 51 pennies for phase 5 to do it alone. That means that the property owners in the phase 5 MSD will be paying $1.63 and the rest of the town will be paying $1.12. If you do the 50-50 split, you'll see it goes to $1.48 for the MSD 5 and town taxes for everyone else outside of MSD 5 would be $1.23. So as we go down the list here, again, you'll see as we lose revenue from parking and occupancy tax, it shifts more of the revenue generation on the property tax side. So if we do parking but not occupancy tax, it's either $1.72 in the MSD and $1.12 townwide. We do the 50-50 split, $1.54 and $1.24. So as you see, as we eke out and get down to the very bottom of the page in scenario 4, I was kind of getting down there. Worst case scenario, you don't get parking, you don't get any occupancy tax. If all the revenue generation of $3 million occurs only in phase 5, they would be $1.85 in phase 5. The rest of the town would still be $1.12. And if you look at it, a 50-50 split, it goes to $1.64 for the phase 5 residents and $1.27 for the rest of town. There's a very small note down at the very bottom. For every penny you take from townwide and put on the MSD, if you remove the penny townwide, it's going to increase it by 2.5 pennies in the MSD. So that's generally, as we look at, if we want to change the split, 50-50 split or such, that's a back of the envelope calculation.
One other comment I'd like to make at this point, because we've heard this and talked it earlier, there is a statutory limit for taxes of $1.50, 1.50. And the $1.50 excludes any debt service on voted general obligation bonds. You don't have any voted general obligation bonds. And so essentially, $1.50 is the maximum that can be charged inside the town, including the MSDs. The county also has a $1.50 limit. So when you see some of these that are over $1.50, the reason they're over is the county tax is in there as well. In no case, without the county tax, do y'all exceed $1.50.
That's my question.
You do not. And we could have made another add up in a column, but when you subtract 71 cents from the highest, which is $1.85, that's not $1.50.
All right.
Alderman Benson.
My first question, and I brought this up 2 or 3 board meetings ago, when it was first suggested that we would consider the municipal service district approach. And I thought about this, and we got information on the various phases and the value of the real estate in those different phases. And I did a little mapping work to figure out how many miles of shoreline there were in each of those phases. And so I see a tremendous imbalance in the amount of shoreline and the potential costs to nourish those parts of town by the various phases if we were to use solely the MSD approach. My question is, why do Carter Associates recommend the MSD approach, and how will you address this tremendous imbalance between the different phases? Because phase 5, 41% of town revenue, phase 3, 6%, yet they have 1.4 miles of shoreline to address. So how do you balance those two factors, and why do you still recommend the MSD approach?
Well, and I would just add on to that, though. I mean, we currently have phase 5. We currently have 5 phases, Alderman Benson. That doesn't mean we have to continue to have phase 5 phases either for the MSD.
Right, but the density of houses per shoreline varies greatly up and down the town. So by making the phases larger, you're still not going to rectify the fact that it's, unless you had 2 phases, phase 1, everything from the inlet down to the start of the current phase 5, that would be phase 1, and phase 2 would be the current phase 5.
I guess I'm just saying that that's up to us.
Revenue
Right.
into,
Could I just say
I'd like to hear their response before we ask them more questions. I asked them a question.
That's fine.
It's fine.
I'm going to show my
Fine.
objections to what he said and then ask you the same
Okay.
question, so go ahead.
Well, let me say this, sir. We are an advocate for a diversity of revenues in funding beach nourishment, especially at the cost levels that they have become in virtually every client we have. We're going to Oak Island this afternoon for a late afternoon meeting, assuming we're get through here before 5.
You will be.
Oh, you will.
If we're not, we're going to call them and say next time.
We'll bring a helicopter.
And so their costs are extraordinary as well. We can't go into them. You can read the press. So our advocacy, and if we've mistaken our communication here, I apologize up front. I am not, nor is our firm, an advocate of a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
We are an advocate to say that we think you have to look at numerous tools to spread the cost.
Certainly.
And the majority of the clients we dealt with, not all, have used a plethora of ways to do that. Generally, it has been a combination approach, some new parking or some new this or some new that. And then on the property tax side, as yet, we have not found an issuer that can do it without any property tax
Right.
influence or participation, not influence, participation. But I would say once you look at the property tax, to look at how you split that is a conscious decision. I certainly haven't, nor do I wish to advocate that it be all one approach. I think that's up to y'all, because equities inside your community are unique to your community. And let me say one thing to finish that. Most of our beach towns have a commercial district.
Right.
They have a very wide second district. And so you've got the
And we
beach
don't.
front and one or two grows. And then, well, at one time, Oak Island, we had 4 or 5.
Right.
And then you got the second layer with lots of rentals. And then you often have a big commercial
Right.
or sizable commercial area. And so those 3 have different tax rates based upon contributions. And then generally on top of that, there is a townwide to kind of balance out the total property tax impact on a specific zone. So we've communicated that we advocate that all of this be charged only to a oceanfront MSD. I apologize, that
You
was
did
not
not.
our intent.
No, you did not. It was very clear that this was our first working model that we were going to talk through as a board. And you also made it clear that Andrew can do all kinds of changes
And
on
we
the
did
fly.
50-50, kind of like that.
I think you're kind of doing essentially what we asked you to do.
That's what we
Okay, so
thought.
let's just slap the table with it now, and that's why he did what he did, Mike, because that's what we asked him to do as a board.
We needed a starting point.
Right,
Yes.
just real
Alderman
quick.
Grant.
The
But
other
I
thing-
am
the other
sorry
thing-
if I did
No,
The
you're-
other thing
you
that was
did.
missed in the question is the fact that we have $15 million sitting in the same people and everybody townwide is paying that. So if you say it's 40% of the town property, that's great, but right now 100% of that debt is to everybody. All right, so to say we're gonna put another $16 million on everybody, when we've already got 15, now we've got 31 million that's in one area. And I happen to live in the middle. I'm not 1, I'm not 5, so I don't have a dog in the sun, except that I don't like it. Second thing is, we're gonna get into things like that. My guess is when you look at the parking revenue, there's none of it coming from 5 or very little coming from 5. So does all the parking revenue then go to the areas like where I live so that we get that far beach nourishment? That's why I like something that's more of a balanced approach. I don't care what happened in the first 15, town decided to do that, all right? But going forward, okay, and if I'm an oceanfront property owner and I'm renting that stuff out, I'm getting a much more benefit than in the same area, let's just say it's 5, where I'm across the road. And so I'm assuming that's also what we're gonna be talking about, is staging it in, so the guy that can rent a place for $12,000 a week is not gonna get hit the same as somebody that rents it for $1,000 a week. And to me, that's a more equitable thing.
I'm gonna
Like I
have
said,
water.
the
Thank you,
argument has been from the beginning that we want to do stuff townwide, but the reality is that's the way we did it. And I have a real problem with $30 million in one area of the town being shared by everybody in the town. I don't think that's equitable across the board. And so I think that's, and like I said, you get down things like parking revenue. Well, where does that come? Is it only at 2 and 3? So do I, if I'm at 2, get all the benefit of the parking revenue because that's my revenue? And I think those are the kind of things and I just fundamentally disagree with where Mike is coming from this, only because the first 15 is already sitting there. We've already got that number and everybody's already paying for that. Okay. And again, if you've got an oceanfront property, your valuation is probably higher anyway, right? My rental income, we don't rent, is going to be higher. All those things are there. And, it becomes what value are people getting? And if I've got the beach, and I actually talked to a homeowner the other day who lives on the water. And he said, look, if the beach is going to be changed in front of my house, I understand I'm going to have to pay more for that than somebody that lives, 3 streets back, because I'm getting the benefit of that. And if I'm renting my place out, I'm going to get the benefit of that as well. So again, and so on, but it's just it's a different feeling in terms
And
of.
I'm not sure if I agree on changing it, because in many layers of the town, we've only got oceanfront and then second row or sometimes third or fourth row.
Right.
But what they're being charged is also being normalized based on the value of the home and also the rental. So if you're oceanfront, as you said, it's a higher value home, you're already paying more in taxes, you're also going to pay more in the occupancy or accommodation tax because you're renting it for more than the third row. Because the third row house might be renting for $1,500 a week.
That's the point.
So I don't know that we have enough layers of streets between the ocean and the sound to try and do what you're talking about, which makes perfect sense in a large city like Oak Island.
Yes.
So I think that we as a board need to be able to provide some direction if we're okay with the 50-50 split, or if we would like to try to change that and see what the model looks like. I also think as a board that we've talked about possibly increasing occupancy taxes if from 1 up to 3. So that may help. And then I do have a note here to try and ask Brian some process questions after we get through the model. Questions 1 would be, what is the process for the occupancy
Right.
taxes?
Just to clarify, I wasn't talking about having multiples. Okay, what I was talking about is if you're oceanfront, you're getting 100% the benefit of that. If you're not oceanfront, I don't think we need 6 layers going across.
Well, I understand,
I'm
but
not sure
years
whether-
ago,
I'm
they
not sure
tried to
we-
model it that way. So oceanfront would pay this and then Soundside would pay this.
That's-
And to me, I don't see the benefit in doing that really.
In a lot of places, I don't possibly. The only place it would really work would be down in phase 5. Because you could use Highway 210 as your split. And everything to the ocean side of Highway 210 would be one rate, and everything to the non-ocean side of 210 would be a lower rate. But that's about the only place in the whole town where it would work. Because as you go further north, and especially once you go off New River Inlet Road, the island is just not that wide.
Aren't you talking, Tom? You mentioned this before, though. I thought that if they were going to do the 2 zones are different, you would only do it in phase 5. We're not talking
Right.
about having it all.
That's
the
what I
way-
just,
Right,
that's what I just said.
Right.
That's what I
It would
just
only
said.
be in
Yeah.
5.
No, it's about the only place, my point is, again, just very quickly, the only place in the town where it would potentially work is in the federal project area.
Yes. That was-
Because you could use Highway 210 as a dividing line for 2 separate rates, one on the ocean side, one on the non-ocean side.
So then let's try and do this as a board so we can try and move through and give some direction to Carter and Associates because we really are starting to run out of time too. For phase 5, are we in favor? It's just, and you can just say aye or no because it's not really an official vote. I just want to be able to give direction. Do we want to keep it the same split between the town and all property owners in phase 5? Let's start with that question. So
This is a discussion. I don't think there's action item.
I'm just trying to see if we want to model it the other way where there's 2 zones in phase 5.
I just want the minutes to reflect this is a discussion.
Yes, sir.
No action item on the special meeting agenda.
Right, but we do need to decide whether we want to look at a different model. Is that
Yeah,
permissible?
you can give the consultant and staff direction via consensus, but I would caution you not to make a formal motion and vote because there's no action item on the agenda.
Okay, well then that's fine. Maybe we can just,
Do you want it? Yes, I'll start.
yeah,
My view on it is, I like and I'm not sure about the 50-50. I think you should model other things. I like the 50-50 split, and I support what Tom was talking about having 5 split, use the road as a split. Now, you can model it out, you're gonna model it out both ways. You've already got a model. So you can show it, you've already done it, saying everybody there is gonna get this amount of money, all right? And then if you could split that in 2, I think modeling that out would be fine. But I am in favor of doing the, what you're gonna call the revenue matrix, where basically there's a split.
so do you want to do a 60-40 in phase 5?
I just think that if the way that I have had these things modeled out in the past is it's very easy from what you just said to us, Mr. Carter, for them to run a scenario that says 60-40, 50-50, 30-70, and just show it what the different tax rates are. Because if it ends up being a penny, nobody cares. But if it ends up being 50 cents, 50 pennies, sorry, then it does. I'd like to see what the sensitivity is to that.
Got no problem doing that. There is a data point we would need that we do not now have.
Okay.
Breakdown.
And that's the second part of this, of the District 5. We only have one. If we can get that, and then we could play with some scenarios on the split between those two, because you got to split between those two to figure out the other split.
Right.
But we could do some of that, yes.
Yeah, I mean, you said you built the model, so all that
We can build it, adding all of that too.
Okay.
but you're asking for feedback.
I
My
am.
feedback is I like the split that you're talking about. Okay, it's a concept. I think we need to see the numbers that looks like, right? But I think what you propose to us, in my opinion, and not a vote, is that it looks like we can come up with the revenue to go forward with the project.
Right.
Assuming that we can do the things we need to do.
Thank you. Alderman Leonard?
Okay, what I would like to see is in the matrix, only phase 5 MSD, and then split between oceanfront and non-oceanfront using Highway 210 as a dividing line. You're already asking for the 50-50 split with that also with subdividing down phase 5. So I'm asking to do it only phase 5 MSD
Between the two.
and split split port and starboard.
And then no town-wide.
Well, he's already got that.
So leave it, okay.
Yeah,
You're just
Rick has
adding to
already
it.
asked me that. I'm asking for something additive to what Rick has asked.
Okay.
And basically what we're asking is scenario 1.
Yep.
Okay, with a further subdivision
Understand.
of the MSD.
I was just making sure you weren't requesting the town-wide portion to come out. Okay.
Well, I'm asking for only phase 5 MSD, so yeah, I am asking.
That's
for
what
the
I'm
town.
trying to clarify.
That I thought I made that clear.
Okay.
Could I ask one question,
Yes.
Mayor? But if I get ahead of you, throw something. Besides 50, do we want to do 30, 50, 70?
That's why I just said 60-40, 50-50, and 70-30. That would just give us a trend.
Okay, 60. So 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. Okay.
But in
It's gonna be a
your,
big old matrix.
Can I
In
make a
your-
suggestion on that? Graph it.
Pardon?
Graph it. We'll be able to see what it looks
Oh,
like.
we'll graph it.
If you graph it, we don't have to have a spreadsheet this
We'll
long.
graph it.
You're gonna see, all I'm looking for is a trend there.
so, but in your scenario, you're still keeping the town split in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in Tom's scenario, he's asking for
But his scenario's already on here.
but Tom is asking for it without the town-wide split.
It's already there.
It's already
It's a matter of how.
Yeah.
It's
the
a
first
matter
Oh, you're just
of-
talking about scenario
Brian,
4.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay,
It's the
I'm
first-
staring at scenario
It's
1.
line on
It's
each of them.
it's
I
a
gotcha.
matter of how you split up
Okay,
That's why
the
Andrew
total
made
cost
two
of phase
lines.
5. That's
I
all I'm
got
asking
you.
for.
I was staring at scenario 1.
It's already on here.
Mayor, I'm bad. I drew it up as one line. Andrew says we've got to have two lines because folks are not going to agree on one to the two sometimes, so two lines is better.
No, good.
Now, I'm looking at all sources here
Yeah,
in
exactly.
that, okay?
Okay.
I'm looking at all sources.
Alderman Peters, do you want to see anything different on this model?
I like Tom's proposal for splitting it up on
Okay,
210.
okay.
And then the percentage for there, Tom, you have,
Well, I'd leave that to them.
okay.
I'd leave that to them to come up with the scenarios within that MSD.
With how much between the second row and the first row?
Right, yeah,
So
yeah.
we want to see how much,
What the split would be.
We can use examples from some of our previous clients on what they did between first and second.
Yeah, what do you usually, what do people usually do?
It's all over the place.
Yeah.
It's
I
all
was
over.
afraid you were gonna ask.
No, but it's not gonna be 90-10, right?
But in most cases,
Well,
it's,
it's 95-5, I believe.
but I've
Wow.
never seen oceanfront get less than 50, even if you
Okay.
got 6 zones.
Right.
But so it
Okay,
tends
that's
to
fair.
always be heaviest on
You know,
the primary rental side.
throwing it out, it would be either 60-40 or 70-30. It's, I don't see it going
We'll
any.
run both of those.
All right,
That's all it is for.
well, I remember very clearly,
Between the two.
speaking of the prior one, it was 80-20. And I remember one specific citizen yelled at me one time, 80-20 is too much.
Well,
So
of course.
Okay,
I think the vote, the result proved him right.
okay.
So,
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, I continue to support the idea that there is a gross imbalance in property tax by zone. So my position here is that for phase 5, there should be one municipal service district only, not split into 2 parts.
speak up, Mike.
My position is because of the imbalance across the town in terms of property tax value and phase, that we need to think in terms of future projects, not this one. My position on phase 5 is that there should be one municipal service district for phase 5, not split between the ocean and the sound. And secondly, to address the imbalance issue that I strongly believe in, I believe the split should be based on the percent of property tax value in that phase. So the split I would like to see is 40 for MSD and 60 for the town. Because later on, when we come to get out of COBRA and we come to situations where there's only 6% of the property tax in that phase, then town-wide, it's going to be a lot bigger burden on the whole town to come up and make an equitable situation compared to what we've done in phase 5, which is really the bull in the china shop in terms of property tax value and nourishment.
So what you're asking for, Mike, is basically scenario 1, but instead of a 50-50 split, you'd like to see it to be a 40
60.
MSD and a 60 town.
Correct.
Okay, got that.
Okay. And Susan?
Well, I like the 2 scenarios up here. I don't see how we can apply what's going on in phase 5 with any of the other beach phases, because we don't know what other boards are going to do. We don't know what other projects may come along. We don't know what other federal dollars would come along, because we just don't know. The phase 5 is all we know right now. And I think we need to deal with what we've got, not future projects, and because we don't know what they might be. That's my personal feeling.
Did you want a different analysis other than what's already?
No, I was just answering Mike's idea.
So I'm comfortable with the requests that have been presented. I would personally like to keep the 50-50 on the scenario list too, because I'm comfortable with that as well.
We're gonna do 30, 40, 50.
I'm
60,
sorry.
70.
Now, I do have a couple questions to Ms. Meyer's point. For additional municipal service districts, as we migrate northward in town, when additional projects are approved or presented to us, can those districts have different terms, Brian, or do they all? Okay, so we're not, even if we did 50-50 here, just because that's the example we have for phase 2 or 3 or 1, we don't have to do the same.
Right.
Okay. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
this is just-
And then the other thing I think we need to talk about, we haven't talked about right now, we've only got the 1 penny in here for the occupancy taxes. Do we want to have that increased? I personally would like to see that to be 2 or 3. You would like 3?
I think the county, look, my take on it is yes for 3 and you hope for 3. And if you ask for 1, you're not going to get more than 1.
Okay.
So
can we
and also, I
increase?
think for the benefit of the people that are worried about everything else here, generally the renters are paying.
They are paying
not
that.
the homeowners.
They are paying that.
Right. And frankly, if I'm renting a beach house for $10,000 a week, I'm not really going to be that concerned about a couple of pennies more in terms of paying that money. And that makes a very good fund for us to be able to do things on the beaches going forward too.
Okay, Alderman.
In response to this Oxford tax increase, first of all, let's determine that 1% is only for 1 year, or.
No, this
that's
is
not
what
true.
we're talking about
Now,
asking
the
for.
The 3%, let's face it, the tourism in North Carolina, tourism industry, the tourism lobby is gonna lobby the state legislature hard to not increase the Oxford tax for any one given town like North Topsail Beach, just because we have a spatial need.
Isn't
So I
it,
think
aren't other towns
we are
paying
just
more?
wasting
No.
our
No, they're
breath.
paying more now, Mike.
We are just wasting our breath
You don't know
to
that.
expect the state legislature
That's
to
what
change the Oxby tax just for the town of North Topsail Beach.
But I believe that there are other cases and other cities or towns that have similar needs that have got an increased occupancy tax approved. Is that true, Mr. Carter?
There have been some that got them approved. It hasn't been a lot, but there have been some.
But it's worth trying.
Yes.
Charlotte got
I'm
it
gonna
for the
ask,
raceway, right?
Pardon?
Did Charlotte get it for the raceway?
Yes.
Okay. Here's the thing. Here's the thing. We can sit around this table all day long and talk about what might not happen. But you know, if we don't ask, we won't get it.
So if
And
we,
I think what we need to do is push forward and ask for the full 3%, and charge our attorney and our financial advisors with what efforts we need to begin that process. knowing it will probably take years to get to fruition, or even to get told no.
Well, that was going to be my next statement. I would personally like to see the occupancy tax on this financial analysis. Why don't we put it at 2 to be safe? And then, but I think we need to find out what process, and Brian, I know we're not in closed session, but
Well,
if somebody could explain the process to us, what do we need to do?
Seek legislation.
Okay.
No one's asked me, but I'm gonna volunteer this. I would not limit ourselves as to what percentage we're seeking. As we negotiate with the representative staff, they may tell us.
Okay.
Don't ask for 3, ask for 2, or you're crazy, don't ask for 2, ask for 3. It just,
Okay.
Well, there's an old saying, you don't start negotiating until the other party's in the room.
But I'm just saying for our financial planning purposes, I'd be comfortable with
But I
2.
think the other thing to follow up on Mike's comment, I think it's a good comment, if we can do it 1% ourselves, even if whether it's annual or whatever, without doing that, that's a very good thing. As we talked about trying to put some funds away anyway, right? So if that's possible, which I didn't realize until Mike brought that up, we have to look at everything, right? If that's year to year, we may not be able to count on it for a 30-year project, but why wouldn't we want to get it year to year?
I think it would be demonstrative of the fact that you put it in and none of y'all were ridden out of town on the rail. So maybe it ought to be longer term.
Wasn't that 1% already put into our budget?
I believe it was.
So we're spending that 1% twice.
I wasn't counting that 1% as this 1% on here. In my mind, when I looked at this chart, this was North Topsail Beach requesting an additional 1% long-term forever.
Okay.
So they're, in
Yeah,
my opinion, they're
I
2
get you.
different things. I think in Mr. Benson's, he was considering it being that 1% we budgeted.
So one more question about Oxby tax and parking fees in the plan that we're looking at. You told us at the beginning of the meeting that with the LGC requirement for the USDA loan, anything over our debt service, once we reach 5 million in our beach fund, should go to prepay off that loan. Now we're talking about parking fees, Oxby tax going for a different project. Aren't we obligated in this time before we get to this overlap that any parking fees and any excess Oxby tax we use to pay off the USD loan?
Well, just let me say this, Mayor Pro Tempore, because negotiations happen based upon how you present them. As your party that helped negotiate it before, I would just basically say we've been presented with an opportunity to do something that we never thought would come, that would make our beaches bigger and better than ever. We, as we agreed in writing, will use the same amount of revenue that we had. None of that will go to the new project. We'll write you a certification every year that that's happened, and we will take all of that excess that will be separately accounted for. It will be paid off as if we didn't have a second project. We're raising additional revenues for a separate project. We need this. Because you're specifically right, just as it's written, unless we get them to amend it, every dime that comes in over pays off. I believe they will be fair-minded people, but I can't fully speak for them.
Mr. Carter, I thought you told us before that, not in this plan, but the previous one, you talked about the fact that you were assuming we were going to pay that off, and that with the overlap period that we talked about anyway. So I thought that the model that you had, or the presentation you had made at the last meeting was, it was our intention, your intention in the model, that we pay off the USDA loan anyway.
There's
That
just
you
going to
had a
be an
period of
overlap.
time where there was going to be an overlap for 1 or 2 years.
Yeah.
But other than that, so.
We are. I think the Mayor Pro Tempore is right to say, in a strictly literalist review, any new revenue goes first to pay off.
Right.
That's why I think we have to compartmentalize this for valid and sound reasons and say, we're not infringing upon our first decision and promise, but we have to take these steps. Please go with it.
So
And we'll take the guy who went with us before to get that done.
Tom, you're going to be sick that day.
I'll go to the basic checkout, a helmet and flak jacket.
Well, he did carry in a machine gun, but it was not fully loaded.
So, I mean, Yes, sir.
To Mr. Carter's point, that the agreement with the LGC reads in section 4, it's entitled modification, and I'm gonna read it verbatim.
Okay.
This is a public record. The LGC understands that the town is seeking to continue its efforts in securing funds for beach nourishment and hurricane protection works. Accordingly, the town and the LGC will renegotiate this agreement in good faith if and when the town has a financial plan to fund additional beach nourishment and hurricane protection.
Perfect.
So guess where that clause came from?
You wrote it, the good ferry.
I know, but
It's
Very
there.
good point.
I don't want to get into all of that in open session, but I think that's what Mr. Carter was hitting on.
Yep.
If we have a cogent plan,
It's valid to come back.
You know, we're not just cowboying up. We say, here's our plan. The Carters are very well respected at the LGC. I think the LGC, number one, they're contractually obligated to negotiate in good faith, but I think they will.
So then the only other question before we move on, because we do have these discussion items, and then I know you all have a drive down to Oak Island,
You're our
but
first client, will stay as long as you want us to.
don't say that.
Hey,
Oh, yeah, they'll go on.
Don't you have to go to
Sorry,
Oak
we gotta
Island
go
too?
now.
He's got to go too.
Oh, you're going to Oak Island?
No, I'm not. I'm just reminding you, I'm
He's their town attorney.
Oh, you're Oak Island too?
Yeah.
I'd forgotten that. That's right. You were there doing the water and sewer stuff.
So is there, first of all, I want to thank the Carters for all the work that went into being able to present us back.
And we wanted it on one page.
No,
That's
we
why it's on
appreciate
one
that.
The next one won't be on.
No, I'm pretty sure it won't be.
Imagine that.
But we
But-
will draft it, but it will be one lots and streamy lines on the draft.
But is there anybody sitting at the board table today that feels uncomfortable with the way we're approaching new revenue streams to afford the federal project? I would like to know that if we're making anybody feel extremely uncomfortable at the table. Okay. You guys good?
Joanne, I'd
Yes,
just
sir.
like to ask the Carters if there's any other thing that you feel that you need to tell us while you're here.
Yes, we're going to go through this nice other document too.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
We gotta do that.
So there's a few things that we wanted to talk through. And Mr. Carter did put it onto a background for us and just things other than the financial, which is extremely important, making sure that we've uncovered every stone to be able to afford the project, which I think we have. There are some other items we just need to identify and determine how we're moving forward with them. The first one being the municipal service districts. I think we've talked about that enough
I
today.
think we're pretty well covered on that for now,
Okay.
especially since we all agree we don't have enough width to have a whole bunch of districts.
So we are looking at a primary and secondary district, right?
And five.
Yes,
And five.
Exactly.
yes, sir.
5 million.
And who's going to get us that data? I presume Laura, somebody, you or David or somebody will get that. I think they even have it.
We just asked Laura for everything and
I've already offered Laura a job if she moves.
Hey, stop it.
She moved the other way, sorry.
Number 2 is determining the NTB revenue impacts and how quickly parking fees, occupancy taxes can be implemented. The land lease, we talked about gathering that information, county involvement. So we've started down the county involvement as far as requesting approval on the occupancy tax increase. I don't know that there's much more that we can do here. Our plan from a parking perspective to definitely have that in place by summertime next year. And I think Alderman Leonard was running charge on that, but to have it in place.
Yeah, the manager and I have had discussions about that since his return to work. We talked about it last week, and I think we're still planning on rolling it out at the beginning of the spring season. One of the issues that we're going to need to have a discussion about at some point is the off-street parking
Mhm.
in the MSD area,
Mhm.
and how we're gonna approach that, given there are many lots that have landscaping and other items, fencing and things like that in the rights of way where parking might be established, and the fact that this project is going to require a certain element of
Parking.
in that area in order to meet all the federal requirements. And so it's not like we're just going to go down there and do what we need to do to make money on parking, but it's stuff that we've got to have a certain amount of parking anyway per the federal project. But that's probably the stickiest wicket in this thing right now, Dave, that I can see, unless you can think of anything else. We're going to have to figure out where we're going to put the parking beyond the lots on the side streets.
Right,
and-
because
and how
most
we're
of our
gonna do it.
parking is outside of phase
Yeah.
5.
But the point is that we're thinking about it and talking about it.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Do you have any other questions on that, Mr. Carter? Because I think we're in good shape there. Now, the one thing I haven't seen
I
yet.
just wanted to-
Oh, I'm sorry, Susan. I didn't see
Are
it.
we still thinking the revenue stream would be 550?
I think that's a safe number to be using.
Okay.
And if we
It
can
could
go
possibly be
northward,
more.
if we
Yeah.
can go
Okay,
northward, that'd be
that's
great.
good. That's the low number. Great.
Yeah, there's some startup costs too. There's going to be some startup costs with machines and things like that. And one of the things that Dave and I have talked about is leasing machines versus buying the machines, given that where they're going to be placed, they're going to wear out quickly due to the elements. And if we're on a lease, we're probably better off than having to replace them out of pocket. It might be cheaper in the long run to lease them. And,
When we initially rolled it out too, Alderman Leonard, we had that pay station at Town Hall too, to kind of allow people to get their tickets and then go there. That may still be a good idea. I don't know, based on where they're going to park.
Right, but, and again, not to get in the nitty gritty of that, but that, you look at that relative to all the way down to the Surf City line, it may or may not work. If you're coming from the north, it ain't working.
Okay.
So, I mean, and that's the nuts and bolts of what we really need the parking company for.
So the next item, I actually think we should take offline because I don't think we need to solve it today. When we had, and please jump in, Mr. Carter, if I'm not describing appropriately, but when we had our conference calls with the Army Corps of Engineer, they had said that there's no specific loan document that's signed other than the PPA, but there were certifications that would have to be signed by the town that we're entering into this loan in good faith, in good terms. We have the ability to pay. So I believe that Caitlin has gotten a draft of something that she gets to sign her life away on. I haven't seen it yet. I certainly would like that to go through the town attorney.
Is it the core form? 'Cause I read that.
Did you already see that?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll take a look.
I haven't seen it yet. So if Caitlin's signing it, I mean, I'm fine, but. So I think that we as a board need to be able to see that too, because we've seen the PPA. So it would just be nice to see what that says.
Can I make one comment?
Yes,
on
sir.
one thing? When we go to the local government commission and say we're looking at another project, we're in good faith finding different revenues and so forth, they're going to want to see that document.
Okay.
I was deputy secretary of the local government commission many, many years ago. I know them very well. They're going to read those papers and say, you cannot have a loan if you don't have a pledge of a revenue or an asset, if you don't have specific terms about what happens in a default.
Okay.
I mean, we buy a car and it's a 20-page piece of paper. So somewhere, somehow, because it isn't even defined what our
In the
what
PPA.
our obligation to pay from is.
Mhm.
And if we aren't limited to what we're going to pay them back from, we have opened ourselves up in a way that I hope we won't.
Then what, do you propose an additional document that is prepared by North Topsail Beach? What are you proposing there?
Well, I would say in our conversation with them, they basically said that they had never done a loan out
Right.
of this district, and they've done few nationally.
Right.
And so, to be fair and honest and right by them, this is a learning process.
Right.
And so, when you operate in the state of North Carolina, the probably most conservative borrowing state, hence the highest ratings in the country, you have to deal with state law. And so I would hope it could be an addendum. And I'm going to say one other thing. In one of these phone calls, a non-appropriation clause was brought up.
Mhm.
Well, lo and behold, they have put some non-appropriation clauses in other agreements. So I would submit to you, we really need non-phone call discussions and emails back saying, no, we can't do that. I just think we really need to go through what we need and why we need it and find out if it's an addendum or what.
Okay, and I think that that would be a separate conversation with attorney.
Yeah,
Is that okay?
I plan on fleshing out what additional sources of clarity or like, when I say security, I don't mean like a secured instrument.
Exactly.
Security we can obtain in writing from the Corps. It's not an outright modification of PPA.
Okay.
Phone calls we've had with them, if they're willing to commit to writing what they told us on the phone.
Exactly.
That'll go a long way.
It would go a long way.
We just haven't been able to do that yet, but maybe we need to formally request it in writing.
Ultimately, and I'll have to talk to Mr. Carter about this, if we have to do our own paperwork and say we're signing the PPA subject to the source of funds or whatever, we can talk about that.
Okay, perfect. I think we're on the same page.
Okay.
I just don't think we can say, okay, we're going to sign something that's got 2 paragraphs on how we pay them back.
Well, Caitlin's paying them back.
Then read her certification and yes, she is.
I mean, I think it's our assumption was similar to the USDA documents that you
Yes.
have. That was another federal agency.
Okay.
that lets you
Andrew,
run
that's
it.
well said.
It should be something very
Yeah.
similar
Yeah.
to that state
And
level.
I plan, to Alderman Leonard's point earlier in the meeting, to look at other towns, the paperwork they had, or what happened in the
Right.
when the party didn't have the money, how did they,
Okay.
did they terminate the agreement, or did they just skip that cycle? I'll recon all of that. That should give us some guidance.
We only have till the 31st.
This is the number one problem.
Okay. The next item, finalize an NTB financial affordability model for this project and other needed capital improvements, which I believe we went through
Can
today.
I make a comment on that now, real quickly? We have data from the staff. Absent the growing, which is fairly far out, don't really know the cost, for the 2 projects that have been defined, based upon the estimated cost, that's going to be another 300,000 a year.
Okay.
And so that 300,000 roughly either gets found by savings in the budget, I don't know that that's there, or each penny's worth $100,000.
Okay. And in the model that you have, did it have the firehouse in it?
It did,
Okay.
I'm sorry, did or did not?
Did.
it did.
Good.
Okay.
That's what the 300,000 would be for that, plus police, something in the police system.
Well, he wants more space. Look at him shaking his head. Yep, more space.
It was 3 million plus 500,000 in the budget.
Okay. Meeting with the LGC with all of this updated information, that's definitely going to have to be something that gets scheduled. And I think we talked enough about that. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Mayor, let me ask you this, because it's all about signing by the 31st and what ifs. If we can sign, if it is your intention as a policy board to do it, I think from a disclosure perspective, we have to say to the Corps, we are signing subject by a written agreement with the state agency of North Carolina. And until they sign off, we got termination right. I don't know how you say it, but
That's what I was kind of asking about.
Conditional.
Yeah, because I'm fearful. We know what the date is today. We got to line them up. We got to get, you got to have several. I just don't know how it's done by the 31st.
I intend to, well, number one, they already know about the agreement we discussed. And whatever transmittal letter that encloses the executed PPA, all those caveats will be brought to the forefront.
Okay.
And
And
I would make one request in that letter. I apologize, that pending that review, that there would be no termination cost to sign if we had to terminate.
well, that's what Mr. Carter had. I don't know if you were in the room when we had spoken about that, because I had asked about the termination clause. If for some reason, and I don't really foresee it happening, if we go with a strong plan to the LGC on what we're doing, especially with the clause that you had mentioned, Brian. But if for some reason they came back and they said, forget it, we are then liable for what they've already spent, and we don't know what those costs are.
We'll flush that out.
Okay.
Within as much we can. I think it's clear though, plan now is the first part of the project. Surf City. They're not even wanting
Right.
real estate for us.
Right.
We can flesh out whether those projects, since that, the letting of that contract and all that's not affecting North Tops Beach.
Right.
We can flesh all that out.
Okay. All right. Alder Grant.
Just real quick, everybody keeps talking about the October 31st date. My view on this is the Corps wants to do the project. If we're acting in good faith and we give them something in good faith by the 31st, it doesn't mean we slow down anything we're doing. I find it highly unlikely they're going to walk away from something and say, look, we really want to go forward with this. We understand you've got 2 years until this thing, to me, and I'm not saying that it is or it isn't, but it sounds like an artificial deadline to me when we're not going to be starting until 2022.
Well, it's the deadline is for them to line up everything to get the project kicked off for the
That's
Surf
fine.
City start.
That's
So,
fine, but my point though is that I think that the consensus, and I don't mean to speak for members of the board, is to go forward with the project, assuming that we can put the financing in place, which has been the issue from the beginning. Okay, and so going to them and
Okay.
saying, look, we understand, we love this project, we want to do it, we're trying to figure out how to pay for it, but we have certain regulatory hurdles that we have to go over to get there. All right, and frankly, if we didn't have the $15 million tied up in debt right now down there,
They know
we
that
probably
too.
wouldn't have the same issue.
yep, they know that. They're aware of
Right.
that.
And so I just think that we go forward in good faith. I think we tell them, again, my view, and I'm not asking the other aldermen to weigh in on this, that assuming that we can put the financing in place, which we believe we can move forward with pretty quickly, is I think the consensus is we move forward with the project and do it. It's just a matter of how we're paying for it. Is that a fair statement?
To me, it is.
Well, I think what that letter was about, more than anything else, was to push us as a board into making a commitment. And it gave us a deadline, a drop dead date at the end of the month.
It happened to be the same deadline we already
And
internally
we already
had.
had that deadline self-imposed, but the point is that they're just pushing us to do what we're sitting here doing right now. That's all they want. They want us, they want a Fisher cut bait kind of an answer, and they want it by the end of the month. And my thought is if they don't get it until the following Thursday when we have our normal meeting or our regular meeting, but they've been advised in the interim that that's what's going to happen, or we're going to vote on it on a board meeting in November, that they're just fine. They're going to be fine. They just want to know that we're working on it, and I think they're trying to gauge our direction, and they're also trying to pressure us into doing something because they've got timelines, as were articulated in the letter, that they have to also meet.
Well, there's nothing that keeps us from having a meeting on the 31st anyway, especially if council can work with them and try to get some language in place, to your point, Mayor, that we're comfortable signing something, understanding, to Mr. Carter's point, that there are approvals we have to get. It's great. And we've got people weighing in and saying, oh, you should go ahead and do this. Well, that's great. But if you can't get the financing.
Well, and I'm going to go the opposite direction on this question. I'm wondering if we shouldn't have Mr. Carter reach out also to the LGC to give them an update on where we are with this.
Absolutely.
So that they're not surprised when we try to get back on their calendar, that they understand all the financial analysis and planning that we've got going into this, that we're working to raise additional revenues for this project.
Yep.
And we've got deadlines we need to meet, but we need to get back in front of them as well.
I was going to ask Mr. Carter to do that.
Okay.
I'm happy to do that.
Yeah.
Now, before the 31st, are we going to come back with all the alternatives?
I would like to. I was going to ask what time frame Andrew needs. Does he need to sleep at night or?
And the date is
21st.
21st. If we can get fairly quickly the appraised values in the second part of 5, it shouldn't take us too long.
Okay.
I guess I'm confused. I thought the consensus that you asked for, Mayor, is that we were all comfortable with a plan for how we were going to raise the revenue. The details of the plan have to be worked out, and they're working on the details. I haven't heard anybody say that we're not gonna have to raise taxes, that we're not gonna have to.
No,
do
I
things.
believe that everybody is comfortable with the options for additional revenue that are on the sheet. We did ask for a few different models. I don't know that we need to have all of that agreed upon by the 31st. I think we'll still be flushing through that.
Okay,
But
good.
if we could maybe even just get an idea of what they're going to look like, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, and that's all I'm saying. It's
Yeah.
like, I think,
We're not going to vote on that by the
right, I
31st.
think, no, but
Okay, good.
Leonard made a good point. It's like, I thought the consensus, not an agreed upon.
No vote.
Was that we're going to go forward with the PPA in some form or not. We haven't formally voted on it. Okay, because now as a group, we're generally comfortable that we can raise the money,
Mhm.
right? Understanding that signing the PPA without fully understanding that we can raise the money is gonna be a problem. And so we have to have
Caveats.
those outs.
I
Is that a
agree.
fair way to put it?
Yeah,
Yes.
all we're doing all we owe the Corps of Engineers by the 31st is
Our desire
green
to,
light on the PPA.
Yeah.
That's all we owe them, right?
That's-
I don't want to commit to anything, I want to talk to the Corps, and we always have the ability to call another special meeting on the 31st if we have to.
Exactly.
I don't want to speak for them, and I certainly don't want to anger any of them. If they see this deadline as a hard deadline, that is what it is. If they watch this discussion and see that we're there, on the following Thursday, maybe they'll wait till that Thursday. But I plan on, number one, having more discussions with Mr. Carter and plenty of discussions with the Corps based on these action items and concerns that we're discussing here today.
Okay.
What you're telling me is you will be prepared if we have to make a move on the 31st.
To let us
We
know.
make a move on the 31st.
Yes, sir. Now that the plan is
Is that gonna be
here,
a cost estimate?
it appears to me the consensus of the board is to go forward, flesh as much of this out as we can, as soon as we can, and it will be a number one priority. Now that appears to be a green light, so.
all right.
Mayor, can I make one more final comment on that? Until we know the price of the project,
Mhm.
until we know the timing,
There's still estimates.
there's all estimates. And as your advisor, to me, a decision is made at the lowest point, not the highest.
Mhm.
And if the comfort level is, if all of this went to MSD 5 and it cost 73 cents, that's the hardest decision you will make.
Mhm.
And if you can make that decision, because it's possible that that one would come, it's possible, then everything else is gravy on top of that.
Mhm.
Did I say that wrong?
No, I got it.
For instance, if we were to get another percent on the.
What's gonna go down?
Right.
I mean, well, let's think about it, folks. 350,000 is 3.5 pennies, or 2.5 times 3.5 is nearly 10 pennies on the other. That's why I love the 1 penny. You know, we gave you a good number at the bottom. Y'all can lay in bed at night and make these calculations.
We just rounded up your 350 times 3 to $1 million. If you get 3%, you get $1 million.
Well, exactly. And that's a lot of pennies. It's
Well,
10
also you got
pennies
parking-
town
we've got
wide,
other
or 25
Then
pennies.
we think about
on the
parking
district.
revenues and other stuff, so.
3%.
Yeah, I know. I'm making a test on this before we leave, so y'all be ready to do the test.
I have my
on this.
calculator. All right, so then the next item is determine other NTB capital needs, which I believe that we've done as well.
Yes, I believe that we're at about 300,000 a year debt service. We all know what that means at 100,000 a penny.
Yeah, the two chiefs are gonna get their boots out and stand at the end of the end of the bridge. And actually, we were talking about, and we don't know what we can do or not do on this. Ms. Myers was going to follow up on this, but we were talking about some festivals and other fundraising opportunities. Are we allowed or able to do that for the police department or fire department? And you don't have to answer right now. We're not.
Didn't serve parameters yet.
We sell donuts.
So the timeframes, what questions, Mr. Carter, do you have on the timeframes? Because I think we've covered a lot of this as well.
I do too. I do too. I think if we can get some stuff through Brian with the Corps, get some feelings on things, it could move rather quickly. My hope is that we could be to the commission, local government commission, in the November timeframe, if possible. And Andrew and I together will give them a verbal update before then, probably in the car on the way to Oak Island.
Perfect.
Just real quick, I mean, one of the comments I've heard is, why didn't we go to the LGC before? And I think the answer is we didn't have anything to go to them with.
Exactly.
We didn't even have a revenue plan.
We
didn't have a
are
cost plan,
your-
we didn't have anything else.
Let me just say this real plain. We are your financial advisors. We would never get ahead of you.
No, but I'm saying the town, why wouldn't the town go to it? Because we don't have anything to present until we have
No.
something.
Well, exactly.
Yeah, we haven't been there yet because what were we gonna say?
It's going, having been there with our esteemed joint colleague there, basically going to the LGC is a game of mother may I, okay? And unless you have something to ask for, you don't go in.
Yeah. It's not real conceptual.
No.
It's here's a decision.
Right.
So what I'm gonna do right now, since I think we're good with the discussion items, is I would like to be able to go around each member of the board and see if they have any final questions.
Lynn, I'm asking
Yes, sir.
for something that may bear on meetings. Do you recommend that the districts be set and formal votes be taken prior to the LGC meeting, or is a plan commit, okay?
Because technically, we wouldn't do the district votes until budget time, because that's when you set.
Wouldn't kick in until next year.
Yeah, I don't think we have to have that. That's a good question.
Good question, Brian.
I think they'll believe we're honest.
Okay. Alderman Grant, do you have any
The only
additional
question I have
questions?
is how many cupcakes do we have to sell to raise $3 million?
Right now,
3 million.
depends on what you charge.
Depends on what you
$1,000
Depends on what you
cupcakes.
Sorry. No, thank you very much. And like I said, I wish that people, particularly in the social media area, would actually pay attention to go back and do the research and look online and look at the numbers and the efforts that are out there instead of just harping about stuff.
But I think that all we can do is what we are doing, which is working extremely hard to try and do the best that we can to make the right decision for everybody who lives here in North Topsail Beach, not just phase 1, not just phase 5. A lot of effort has gone into this, and I personally am thankful for everything that the staff has done
I agree.
and that the Carters have done, and also all the time that you all have put into just studying everything that's coming our way. Alderman Leonard.
I have a question for Andrew. Going through the matrix, and I meant to ask you this earlier, and we got kind of sidetracked. We currently get occupancy tax at the rate of 3% for our short-term rentals. Is that in here somewhere buried that I just don't see, or is it applied into
It's
any
in
of
the
the revenues?
payback of the USDA loan.
Yeah, this is the
Okay.
only
So
net
it's
new.
pledged.
Above the line
Well,
on this.
all
That
right.
can't go over here. Now,
That's already
anything
being
new
pledged,
can
right.
go.
This is only net new.
Okay.
Pardon? Yeah, this is
All right.
only the
Okay.
old, if we put in the old in here,
Yeah, okay. I just had to ask because I didn't see it, and that makes
yeah,
perfect sense.
we
and
should
that's-
have noted that to
You
y'all.
know,
apologize.
and I'll just, and it's unfortunate that Alderman Grant isn't here right now, and I'll just make a public comment concerning, y'all need to not let what's being said on certain outlets of social media drive you crazy. Because quite frankly, those people will always sit back at their keyboards. They will always criticize. They will always find fault with decisions and plans and policies, but yet not a darn one of them bothers to show up here, with the exception of the folks that are here, and they're not complaining and criticizing anyway. And don't let them drive you crazy, because we got a job to do, and all it is noise, and all it is distraction. And that's all I have.
Roll on by.
Mhm.
Do you have anything, Alderman Peters?
Well, I would just add to your comments that I totally agree with. And then Tom obviously bringing up a totally different area.
Mhm.
I'm not even on Facebook or social,
Yeah, don't go there.
so I don't have to worry about
Well,
that.
I'm not on Facebook for the next 7 days.
So anyway, thank you to the Carters. Appreciate your presentations and continued hard work.
We will always be honest with you. That's what you hire us for.
Fantastic.
So my only question, and other than, is certainly to thank you all for coming here. I think that this was a very, very productive meeting, and I'm glad that you're all able to join in person. Are we able on our website or on our Facebook page to be able to share this and even say it's, draft number one? I mean, I just want to make sure we're being as transparent as possible. I know this is going to be changing and that there's not been anything that's been set in stone yet, but what does the board think about being able to get something out on the Facebook page? Or Mr. Gilbride, what do you think? You're going to get the calls. This one? Okay. Can we do that at least and just say, we're going to be exploring many additional. Okay. I think it would be good. I just want to get some information.
We discussed the matrix in detail. Why wouldn't we just post what they just sent us? What's confidential about
Well, that's why I brought it up. I don't think it's confidential.
Right.
It's really just that so that's why I was saying if we put like draft, first revision, more to come, or something on it so that people don't think that this is exactly what we're doing yet, but these are different alternatives.
I'm just saying, but to Brian's point, it's a public record now. I think we should post everything. We've got so many people out there sniping at this stuff that don't understand anything. The annexation issue, which I love as a lawyer, is one of my favorites. The person pushing that doesn't understand what that involves. Okay. But my point though is, and just people doing that kind of stuff, let's be transparent with it.
It's too bad you weren't here for my comments because
So-
they addressed, don't let social media drive you crazy.
But it's not even, that's not even social media. This is just trying to be as transparent as we can be.
Went back to the other thing.
But my point is, it's got a date on it.
Right.
Okay, it's already a public record.
I think we gotten to the point where we're going to post it, right?
That's my
Moving right
question.
along.
Are we okay with that? And
Moving
then,
right along.
Man, can I make one comment? Since
Yeah.
It was written for y'all that are highly understanding of what we're working on. I do think David's introduction to it,
certainly,
why you got it, what the process has been.
that there will be other
could help
revisions to
someone Who
come.
doesn't have the knowledge you have, understand what is this thing?
Yep.
And I think it's important to say that the consultant hasn't recommended any one of those options.
Right.
Yes, it is.
And then give Mr. Carter some.
Why do you think estimate?
But the document's a public document. So just put it on the.
Well, I'm just saying, I don't,
Workshop
it would be counterproductive if the public thought that the consultant crunched these numbers and based on their years of experience, said this is what's best. for
Yeah,
the
no,
town.
I don't-
That's not what's been conveyed here.
No, it's not. And that's not my intention at all. It's really just to I would say share version one
I
of
think
what we
beat
just
this to death,
started.
Mayor. I think we have. I think we've got a way ahead with it, and I think we can move on.
Okay, well, I just want to make sure I give direction to Mr. Gilbride to make sure that he's comfortable with what goes out there. Okay. Mayor Pro Tem?
I have no additional questions. I do think it's important that somehow we communicate these numbers to the public because we've had so much positive comments to the town when we did our frequency asked questions that they were all in favor of the federal project and why we were turning down all this money. And I think that the public needs to have an idea of the range of what it might cost to do this project in terms of the property tax. So I think it's important whether you do the whole matrix or just do a range of possible values that tax might increase by to accomplish the project. I think somehow we need to give the public an idea of what the real numbers might look like.
No, I think we all agree to that. And I think I'm going to look to staff to figure out the best way to do that.
And secondly, I just want to echo, this has been a very productive and I would say actually historic meeting.
Thank you. Susan?
I agree. I think we're gonna, if we don't explain that 50-50 isn't the only thing we're looking at, because that's all people are gonna read. They're gonna look at it and go, it's 50-50, I'm gonna have to pay whatever. Or I don't have to pay as much as I thought I might, and then when it comes up, whatever. I just think it needs to be clear that that's not necessarily what we're gonna do. Because people have a tendency to overreact when they see a quick number.
I understand. Agree.
But that's all.
Okay.
And thank you for coming.
Thanks.
Do we have a
Glad to be
motion?
Make a
Motion to adjourn?
we adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.